Hello. My title has changed slightly to reflect some of the conversations I've had with the panel participants. It's Trauma, Tragedy, and Ernest Hemingway's Across the River and Into the Trees. Tension in the 20th century American narratives engage a dichotomy among thinking, feeling subjects, and perceived objects of experience. The emphasis on the narrative tension appears as modern American authors attempt to speak from within and in observation of another individual's consciousness, an often silenced individual consciousness or experience. The move in the modern narrative witnesses prior evolutions occurring as a result of reading and investigating of American Civil War stories and narratives for the silences left in the wake of the trauma of the war. Robert Penn Warren's 1961, The Legacy of the Civil War, argues that before the Civil War, America had no history. In Warren's view, to have history, one has to have stories. And the nature of stories is to be fallen, to face the dark side of your own nature, and to have some dark knowledge you cannot bear. Therefore, prior to the Civil War, America had primarily narratives of success and patriotic unity. Following the Civil War, the stories and narratives of the nation imprecate the fallen elements and the dark knowledge unearthed by the experience that cleaved the nation in two, into both the history and the narratives. Warren's notions preface a tension that ultimately arises in modern American fiction. Modern authors realize that capturing this tension requires a move beyond romantic dialogue or realistic narrative summary. Many writers of the period between 1910 and 1945, including Ernest Miller Hemingway, address a cultural tension between a fragmented inner self and a menacing and often unknowable exterior world. Writers echo this cultural psychic discrepancy in an incongruity between narrative style and external events evoked in their text. Early American fiction styles embody narrative structures either suited towards a more romantic style with objective sentimentality figuring predominantly, or towards realistic style with a subjective pragmatism and a focus on the here and the now. The critic and reader of the text between 1910 and 1945, including Hemingway's work, confronts a different tension between style and subject matter. The appearance of this narrative tension references shifts appearing in the fiction of the post-Civil War period. Hemingway's fictional impressions and realizations are not new. Men had fought and died before Hemingway and the modern period. However, Hemingway's characters' progressions reference the decay of pre-existing structures which previously had provided meaning to the world. Hemingway crafts this awareness specifically in Across the River and Into the Trees in the figure of Richard Cantwell. In this novel, Cantwell recollects that no one of his other wounds had ever done to him what the first big one did. I suppose it was just the loss of immortality, he thought. Well, in a way, that is quite a lot to lose. In this passage, Hemingway's Cantwell reflects and remembers an eternal effect of the external experience of the war and trauma. Hemingway's narrative focuses on Cantwell's understanding of the effects of his litanies of wounds, and the narrative also imbricates notions of war as wounds on the consciousness of a nation. The Civil War, as one of the first wounds of the United States, similarly affects the nation's consciousness. This affection appears in the treatment of the South in literature following the war. Comer Van Woodward's The Burden of Southern History suggests that the South's experience of defeat operates to distinguish the region from the nation. Woodward argues that the defeat of the South operates as a metaphor of defeat and pain for the nation. As other, the Southerner images of the South appear in literature as mouthpieces to give voice to the external from a position of limited interiority. Thus, the tension between external and internal perspectives in modern American fiction in general and war fiction in particular creates a narrative that originates from the trauma of war and the Civil War particularly. The question arises, how does a body of literature deal with subjects who are speaking from an abject position of trauma? Trauma, as viewed by Sigmund Freud, is an experience that is not fully assimilated as it occurs. The experience of trauma operates as a complex play between knowing and not knowing that occurs in reaction to a breach in the mind's experience of time, self, and the world. This awareness is abject. It is a knowledge that operates from within and without, and sometimes from another space. Narratives that attempt to embody trauma and traumatic experiences attempt to treat an experience that does not occur within normal subjective or objective narrative understanding. Notions of traumatic remembrance in Hemingway's Across the River offer a component and a link to the influence of the American Civil War on modern fiction. Ellen Scarry notes that without memory, our awareness would be confined to an internal predicate, and our lives would be virtually devoid of meaning. In this context, Hemingway's later characters, like Cantwell, experience remembrance in a different fashion than his earlier characters. The act of remembrance operates as a method for attempting to understand the interior self in reference to the exterior world. Likewise, the memory of the Civil War operates as it lies like a palimpsest beneath the surface of modern American fiction. The desire to locate meaning through an attempted recollection of past traumas echoes from the first national trauma, the Civil War. The post-Civil War literature seeks to explore understanding through the remembrance of this exterior world fraught with trauma. In Across the River and Into the Trees, Hemingway presents Cantwell's memories that occur in the past before the events of the narrative. These moments appear as an interior representation of an objective self. Cantwell remembers, "That was the day before yesterday. Yesterday he had driven down from Trestay